Imagine this. You're standing in a room where strength is being celebrated. Not quiet strength, not human strength, but performance strength. The kind that never trembles, the kind that never hesitates, the kind that keeps going even when something inside is quietly cracking. You're told, sometimes directly, sometimes just by watching others, that growth means becoming harder, less affected, more resilient, more unshakable. You're praised for handling it, for not needing help, for pushing through without complaint, for surviving without letting anything show. And maybe you've become very good at that. So good that people now describe you as strong, reliable, capable, someone who doesn't need much. But here's the question no one asks you. What if that version of strength is actually what's keeping you stuck? What if the exhaustion you feel isn't because you're weak, but because you've been trying to be strong in the wrong way? Imagine this instead. Imagine that growth isn't about adding armor. It's about removing it. Not becoming tougher, but becoming more honest. Not learning how to endure more pain, but finally admitting how much pain you're already carrying. That idea feels unsettling, maybe even dangerous, because everything around you suggests the opposite. You live in a culture that treats vulnerability like a liability, where fragility is framed as failure, where needing support is confused with incompetence, where emotions are things to manage, control, or optimize. So you adapt. You tell yourself you're fine. You explain what hurts instead of feeling it. You turn sensitivity into humor. You turn grief into productivity. You turn fear into discipline. And from the outside, it works. You function. You perform. You keep moving. But inside, something subtle starts to change. You stop knowing what you actually feel. You stop trusting your own limits. You stop recognizing when you're overwhelmed until your body forces you to notice. Because here's the paradox no one prepares you for. The more you deny your fragility, the more power it has over you. Unacknowledged weakness doesn't disappear. It leaks. It shows up as irritability, as chronic fatigue, as emptiness after achievement, as the strange feeling that you're living slightly outside your own life. So ask yourself, honestly, when was the last time you allowed yourself to be fragile without immediately trying to fix it? When was the last time you said, "This is actually too much," without feeling embarrassed for saying it? When was the last time you let yourself be seen not as capable, not as composed, but as human? If that question makes you uncomfortable, that matters, because discomfort is often the first sign you're getting close to something real. Here's another question that goes even deeper. What if your idea of strength was never really yours? What if it was inherited from survival, from expectation, from a world that rewarded you for being useful rather than authentic? What if being strong was something you learned to do in order to stay safe, accepted, or needed? Psychologically, this is where things start to make sense. You don't fear fragility because it's inherently bad. You fear it because at some point, it cost you something. Maybe being sensitive made life harder. Maybe expressing need led to disappointment. Maybe emotions weren't welcomed, only tolerated if they were quiet and convenient. So you adapted, not consciously, strategically. You replaced feeling with functioning. You replaced vulnerability with competence. You replaced honesty with control. And here's the important part. That adaptation worked. It helped you survive. It helped you belong. It helped you succeed. which is why questioning it now feels threatening. Because if fragility was dangerous back then, your nervous system still treats it as dangerous now, even if your life is different. This is where philosophy and psychology intersect. We're taught to admire endurance without asking what it's costing, to praise resilience without questioning what it's protecting us from. So fragility becomes something vague and shameful, something to overcome rather than understand. But fragility isn't weakness. It's signal. It's your system saying, something matters here. Something exceeded your capacity. Something needs attention, not domination. When you ignore that signal, your psyche doesn't thank you for being tough. It compensates. It numbs you when you refuse to feel. It exhausts you when you refuse to rest. It creates anxiety when you refuse to acknowledge fear. It creates emptiness when you refuse to grieve. From the outside, you might look stable. From the inside, you're fragmenting. And here's the deeper paradox. The version of you that prides itself on being strong often depends on fragility staying hidden.
Because if you admitted how fragile you actually are, you'd have to question the identity you built around endurance. You might have to ask whether your ambition is driven by curiosity or by avoidance. Whether your discipline is grounded in values or in fear. Whether your independence is genuine or just a refusal to need anyone. So instead of listening, you escalate. More discipline, more control, more optimization. But the more you try to overpower fragility, the more fragile you actually become. Because resilience isn't built by suppression, it's built by integration. Ignoring fragility doesn't make you resilient, it makes you brittle. And brittle things don't bend, they shatter. That's why some of the strongest looking people collapse without warning. Why the most together person in the room is often the least prepared for loss, uncertainty, or change. They never practiced fragility. So when life demands it, they have no language for it. This is where the consequences quietly take shape. You stop asking what you want and start asking what you can tolerate. You don't choose relationships because they nourish you. You choose them because they don't overwhelm you. You don't pursue work that excites you. You pursue work that keeps you functional. You feel calm, but flat. Stable, but distant. Capable, but strangely absent. This isn't burnout. It's emotional atrophy. Just like muscles weaken when they're never used, your emotional system weakens when it's never allowed to fully respond. You stop feeling deeply not because you're healed, but because you've learned not to feel at all. And when fragility disappears, so does intimacy. Because fragility is how connection forms, not through perfection, but through exposure. Without it, relationships become efficient but shallow, functional but sterile. You can solve problems, you can support others, but being seen, truly seen, feels unsafe. So you stay guarded, contained, alone in ways that are hard to explain. And then there's the body, because the body never agrees to emotional denial. It only tolerates it for a while. Unexpressed fragility shows up as tension you can't name, as fatigue sleep doesn't fix, as anxiety without a clear source. You might call it stress, or adulthood, or just how life is. But often, it's the accumulated cost of pretending fragility doesn't exist. So here's the turning point. If denying fragility leads to numbness, disconnection, and quiet collapse, then growth can't be about becoming tougher. It has to be about something far more radical. It has to be about allowing yourself to be fragile on purpose, not as weakness, not as collapse, but as contact. Contact with what you feel, with what you've been avoiding, with the parts of you that were never meant to be optimized, only understood. This is where growth stops looking impressive and starts looking honest. Because choosing fragility doesn't feel heroic. It feels still. It feels exposed. It feels slow. It starts when you stop asking, "How do I get through this?" and start asking, "What is this asking of me?" You stop fixing. You start listening. You say things like, "I'm not okay. This hurts more than I admit. I don't know what I need yet." Those sentences feel dangerous because they remove the illusion of control, but they also remove the pressure to perform. Fragility acknowledged becomes information, not threat. And something surprising happens. When you stop fighting your own signals, your system begins to settle. You don't become chaotic. You become clearer.
Not because life is easier, but because you're no longer lying to yourself about how it feels. Growth stops being linear. You feel open one day, raw the next. Clear in one moment, confused in another. That's not regression. That's reality. You're no longer editing your experience to look like improvement. You're living it as it is. And slowly, quietly, you notice something change. You're not stronger in the old sense, not tougher, not more impressive, but you are steadier. Because your sense of self is no longer built on denial, it's built on contact. Which leads to the final truth, the one that reframes everything. Growth isn't the moment you stop breaking, it's the moment you stop being afraid of breaking. Nothing alive is rigid. Nothing alive is sealed shut. Nothing alive is invulnerable. What's alive bends, responds, breaks, and repairs itself differently each time. Fragility isn't a flaw you outgrow. It's the condition that makes growth possible. You didn't become weaker when you admitted it. You became accurate. Accurate about your limits. Accurate about your needs. Accurate about what you can give without disappearing. And accuracy is more powerful than bravado. Because when you stop pretending to be invulnerable, life stops needing to break you to get your attention. You listen sooner. You rest earlier. You grieve before grief hardens. So growth isn't becoming someone who can endure everything. It's becoming someone who no longer has to. Someone who knows when to stop, when to soften, when to ask, when to feel without explanation. You are not unfinished because you are fragile. You are unfinished because you are alive. And that's not a problem to solve. It's the truth that makes growth possible at all.